Waves by C. Don McCallum. Chapter 2. Gerlain still wasn't there, but if Tora could keep on working, so could she. Mia pushed her hair back from around her face, leaving a little dust from the rubble at her temples. He'd never waited this long to come to the village before. She didn't think he was swallowed in the night, though. For some reason, no one did. That's why the villagers agreed not to draw the mark through his name on the list, not until they knew for sure. Mia's hands were sore and calloused from moving rubble. At least they weren't searching for people anymore. She lifted another stone and set it in her bucket. Now they were looking for anything useful cookware, unbroken jars, anything. But Mia didn't even want to find any of those things. They would just remind her of the world she didn't live in anymore, of the people she wouldn't see, of the things she wouldn't do. She wished they'd let her work at the river. She could learn to fish. She knew she could. And if they wouldn't let her do that, she was big enough to stand on a ladder under the limbs of the fruit trees and pick them when they pushed out from the blossoms in the orchard. Or she could learn to work the field. She was old enough to learn now. Her hands were strong from picking up stones all day, from digging holes for the dead. If the world didn't stop quaking and opening up its thin, invisible lips in the night, they would let her have a different job. There wouldn't be anyone left. What choice would they have then? The book hidden at her belly was getting moist from her sweat. I'm never going to get to the school, she thought. I've got to get rid of this thing. Turning her eyes to Tora, she could see everyone working hard to remove the endless rubble. Their village had seemed so small until it lay in a pile on the ground. She didn't hear Gerlain walk up behind her, but she felt her heart thumping in her chest. She couldn't breathe. She had known he was alive. She knew it. Everything she wanted to tell him rushed through her mind. She wanted to tell him that he shouldn't wait so long to come in from the wilderness, that his mother was worried, that they almost crossed his name off the list. Then she looked into his eyes, full of life, and couldn't find any words. But I love you. I'm glad you came. I missed you. She was glad she couldn't speak. I saw a wolf this morning, Gerlain said, his eyes picking up the light of the blue sky and shooting it back through her. She didn't say a word. She just watched his hands pick up stones and grow dusty. She felt his eyes blazing on her. He looked me right in the eyes, he said so only she could hear. Then he just walked away. The storybook slipped against her skin. Can't you even give your mother a kiss, Gerlain? Tora sat at the mound where she and a few of the children piled stones into neat stacks along the road. You knew I'd be here, Mother, he said, waving at her. I always come back. Tora didn't say anything. She just smiled and nodded. Her son was home. That's all she seemed to need. Mia pushed more dust behind her ears and lifted a final stone into her bucket, her fifth one this morning. Standing, she lugged the bucket down to Tora. Please don't let the book fall, she thought as she joined the slow trickle of children walking down the slowly decreasing mound to empty their buckets. To start again. They used to talk and laugh together. They used to tell stories and jokes. Now everyone was quiet except for the occasional whisper. The only sound she heard was Gerlain's hands working behind her. That's the only sound she let herself hear. Take me with you, she wanted to scream to him. Out to the wilderness. We could haul a load of bricks out there and build a new village, a new life. Instead of her rage rising through her throat, she listened to the bricks clink as she dumped her bucket. Dust scattered on the wind. She took her empty bucket back up the mound to where Gerlain worked, his hands always moving. What are you hiding, Mia? Gerlain whispered, his eyes steady on his work. Her heart stopped. His blue eyes cut to the side, and he looked right through her. Had he read her mind? Is that what sleeping in the wilderness teaches someone who's more afraid of tent poles than wolves? Mia took in a deep breath because she would have fallen on the dust if she hadn't. Gerlain's eyes shifted to where the book lay under Mia's belt. He smiled and looked again for the lost items in the rubble. He seemed to want to find something. Mia pulled the book up again and busied her hands with the stones. I need volunteers to get food from the storehouse, Tora called to the children. We'll go, he said, grabbing Mia's forearm and throwing their arms to the sky. Mia dropped what she had in her hands and let herself be led down the mound of rubble, her free hand held over the storybook. They headed for the storehouse before anyone had a chance to say a word. The sun was high in the sky and not blinding them over the edge of the school like it used to when they walked there every morning. Gerlain, Mia, and Perla. All around, people worked in silence on the outskirts of the leveled village, seemingly unaware of the two young people on the road. No one knows what I'm hiding, Mia thought. Not even Gerlain. Perla was the only one who knew, and now she's gone. Forever. So what is it? Gerlain asked her, his gaze sinking into her soul. Mia slid out the book and handed it to him. He froze on the road and took the book, warm from her body. In an instant, all the world seemed to disappear for him as he flipped the pages. The wilderness no longer stood around him. The fallen stone walls dissolved into the ground. The empty and ready field melted into the sky. The orchards withered away after throwing their blossom scents into the air one last time. Gerlain spread open the book's leaves and touched the cracked paint on the pages. He stroked the black lines and circles that some unknown person so long ago, long before the village was founded, had pressed his pen on this paper and made meanings obvious and subtle. The storybook, the relic of the past that everyone thought was lost. Pulling the book to his face, he breathed it in. Words escaped from her lips. We were digging the rubble at the old school, she explained. Her voice must have sounded like wind to Gerlain. He was so lost in the book. I saw it there under the teacher's desk. I took it. She waited for him to say something. I just took it. Entranced, he didn't seem to hear a word she said. Perla used to read it in the night, she told him. At the sound of her sister's name, he looked up. Perla was a word he understood. I'm afraid, Gerlain. His eyes were on her, but his fingers caressed the pages. I'm afraid that the world swallowed Perla because I stole the storybook. Gerlain closed the book tenderly, holding it to his chest. That's not why, Mia, he said with certainty. No one knows why the world is swallowing people. No one knows why it chooses the ones it takes. You can't think like that. Don't listen to the village gossip. That's all it is. No one understands it, so don't blame yourself for what happened to Perla. His voice trailed off. He almost couldn't say the words that came next. That's why I don't go to the fountain in the morning, he whispered, touching the book's worn leather cover. None of the villagers had figured out how to make such a supple and intricate cover like this. Other copies of the book had been made, but none as beautiful as this one. Every time I look at the fountain, I see Perla telling the stories behind the pictures your father painted. I hear her voice. I see the tree vibrant behind her. I remember how she cried when she saw the fountain was cracked and her father wasn't there to help repair it. Villagers pruning trees in the orchard looked out at them standing on the road. No one stood and talked on the road anymore. Without discussion, Mia and Gerlain's feet started moving toward the storehouse. You're right, she said. I know you're right. Don't just say it, Mia. Believe it. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him look down at the tiny book in his hands and squeeze it close to him. I need you to help me put it back, she said. I've been trying to put it back, but I can't. You can, Mia, he said, stopping again on the road. He handed the book to her. But I'll help you. He looked away and walked as she slid the book back under her belt. Mia ran to catch up with him. Let's see if the people in the care tent need anything from the storehouse, Gerlain said, grabbing Mia's arm. They switched directions on the path. The care tent wavered in the wind like a cloud hovering next to the old school on the road in front of them. They could already hear the people whispering inside. Mia and Gerlain ducked into where Seema and Olsa tended to the people still recovering from the last quake. The tent was dark and smelled like the crushed berries and leaves Seema used to make the healing paste. You decided to come back to your village, Gerlain? Mencha scolded. Do you know how your mother worries? The old woman turned back to the plates she was laying on a table. We came to see if you needed anything from the storehouse, Mia asked. We were on our way over and Mencha held up a bag of dried fruit and started piling them on the plates in front of her for the handful of people lying on the cots. Mia, Gerlain, come see you old classmate, Seema told them, leaning over the little body wrapped in blankets on a cot. Cole's brown hair crawled out of the bandages tightly wrapped around his head. The healing paste leaked through, staining the bandages brown with a touch of red. At least Mia hoped that's what it was. Mia wouldn't have recognized him. She looked at the swollen face of the boy in front of her. This couldn't be the same boy who smiled all the time, even after his own mother went missing in the night. They'll come back, Cole had told the children excavating the walls of the old school. Then we'll rebuild. We'll start over. He meant it, and the children believed him. But now Cole was moaning in the care tent with 3-day-old bruises from the stones that the world threw at him when it quaked from its strange hunger. The next night Perla went missing, taken into the world's belly. Gerlain picked up the healing paste from the table next to Cole's cot and stirred it, looking at the semi-conscious boy. We're going to rebuild the fountain when you get better, Cole. Gerlain's voice filled the tent and bounced off the last remaining wall of the old school several feet away from the tent. He looked to the wall, then at Mia. Go now, his look told her. Hide the book in the dust. Right, Mencha? He asked. Don't you think the first thing to do is to rebuild the fountain? Since when did you take such an interest in the village? Mencha asked. I thought you were a wilderness dweller now. Mia ducked under the flap of the care tent and headed toward the school wall. The little storybook was tight at her belly. I only sleep there at night. With the wolves and the world knows what else. I saw one last night, Mia heard him say, his voice coming off the wall. I don't like you staying out there, Seema told him. I can't imagine what you're putting your mother through. The words from the tent faded from Mia's understanding. She heard them, but she didn't know what they meant. She looked at the remaining wall of the old school, and for a moment it looked like the rest of the building could be hiding behind there. But she knew better. She'd been in the excavation crew the week they dug through the rubble looking for bodies, for anything they could still use. That's how she got into this situation in the first place. Turning the corner, Mia's vision of the old school dissolved completely. All she saw was the dust of the mortar, piles of stones. They'd sifted it well, and there was nothing left. Mia lifted the book from under belt. It was warm and moist from her body, and she wondered what the dust would do to the supple, engraved leather, to the hand-painted illustrations, the perfect lettering that she couldn't comprehend. After the tree and the fountain, the old storybook was the most precious thing in the village. The people had already seemed lost without its stories to comfort them. Mia had done enough damage by taking that from them. The people had lost their stories, everything. Then Perla was taken too. Could I sink the storybook into the dust and leave it to rot? Would anyone believe that we'd missed it in the rubble? Mencha would know that something didn't make sense. She would find out what happened. Gerlain's voice still echoed off the wall on the other side. He was keeping Mencha busy. If Mia was going to do it, it had to be now. Mencha was probably going to figure out where she had gone any minute. Mia opened the book and held it to her nose, like Gerlain did on the road. It just smelled old to her. Why did he love this smell so much? She flipped through the pages. The letters had a certain beauty she couldn't explain. Maybe it was because she knew the stories those letters represented, the love Perla and the whole village had for them. The pictures were beautiful too. She loved them the most because they reminded her of her father, of the tiles he painted for the fountain, of Perla telling the stories. That was back when people listened to each other. But Perla was gone, because Mia stole the book. She had to get rid of it, even though it wouldn't bring her sister back. But maybe. Mia kneeled by the pile of dust. She scooped a hole away and looked at the book again. Was she ready to do this? Could she do it? Bury it like all the people lost under stones in the quakes, like the ones lying in holes south of the orchard. Could she feed the world's belly with the stories of her people, the only thing they had left? But maybe it would stop the quakes. Maybe people would stop disappearing in the night. This book could be what the world was hungering for. Then an image of the book, dusty and rotting, made her cringe. She couldn't do this. If only Perla were here to help her make sense of all of this. Gerlain. She had to talk to Gerlain. He would help her understand. Mia put the book back under her belt and stood, kicking at the hole she'd made. Talk to Gerlain, she told herself. He'll know what to do. Then she sensed someone at her back. Mensch's tiny frame wobbled behind her. What are you doing, Mia? The old woman asked, her white hair springing from her head. Mia couldn't think. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her heart and the rush of blood to her face was all she could feel. You know that Gerlain was for Perla, the woman said. They were meant for each other. He was not meant for you. I want you to stay away from him. Mia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mencha didn't suspect anything. She didn't know about the book. Mia, go to the storehouse, go get food for the children, then stay away from him. He's no good for you. Stay away. Do you understand? Filled with relief, Mia nodded and headed to the road. Yes, they had to get to the storehouse. Tora would be wondering what happened to them. The children needed to eat, as much as anyone she knew how tired and hungry they were by now. But as far as Mencha's advice went, staying away from Gerlain, Mia would have to see about that. Thank you for listening to Chapter 2 of Waves by C. Don McCallum. If you're enjoying this story, please consider sharing it with someone you know, and please like the video and subscribe to this channel to help others discover these stories.